sang some songs as we started 60 seconds. So for about 60 seconds, if you want to just wax philosophical.
I did the phenomenon.
Yeah, well, I'm very shy, so y'all be very kind to me, right? I'm just kidding. So, yeah, is that good enough? You feel good?
All right, thank you all for being here.
Are we priming the mic? Is that what we're doing?
Oh, yeah.
Prime?
Prime 2, 3, 5.
Yeah. Okay, 5, 3, yep.
Unless you want to do Fibonacci.
No, you go ahead, Bob. You're still in my thunder, but go ahead.
All right, welcome everybody to the 1330 to 1:30 presentation for track 3. The discussion here is about attacker's perspective, the dangers of relying on Marketecture, exploring the risks and strategies in the enterprise security architecture, or ESA. I'm going to turn it over to Darren Freddy, who's going to do the presentation, and he can do an introduction first few readings. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Well, guys, thanks for coming out. Really, sincerely, I really appreciate it. I always get excited whether there's one person in the room, 2 people in the room. I'm just excited to talk about it. I'm a bit of a compulsive, obsessive freak when it comes to technology. I love it. I'd probably do it for free or Scooby snacks, which means that's my funny way of saying that if you give me a compliment, I usually love that, you know. We're going to talk about the attacker's perspective of the dangers of relying upon Marketecture. You're probably wondering, what the hell does that mean? So I'll explain it to you as we go along. It's a clever hook to try to get you interested in what I'm talking about. But it has more meaning than that, and I'll explain it as we go through there. But, you know, I'm going to brag about myself because everybody seems to do this, and this is my time, so here you go. I've been in the industry cumulatively over 20 years. It's probably longer, but we'll just go with 20. That's IT plus security. I've worked in multiple disciplines. I've been a CIO before. One of my biggest projects, or one that I did with infrastructure that makes me qualified to really talk about this topic, is I did the Love Field Modernization Project. I did most of the security products in that building. I've worked with large infrastructure, small infrastructure. I cut my teeth in telecommunications. I've worked in banking, finance. I've been a pen tester for 6 years. I also ran under the name of Birch Klein, where you're going to get to hear. That was a label that I was working under. Nobody knows I did the pen testing. And I did that for 6 years at the same time. I teach at a college, Dallas College. I teach the ethical hacking class. I also teach another class. So I've been in the industry a while. And how this topic really came about is that I was having a hard time articulating what I was trying to say. And I didn't have quite my thesis worked out. And what I was thinking about is that I knew from an attacker's perspective, when I would attack things and I would do pen testing, which you're going to see a lot of use cases, that there was this lack of vision for the enterprise security architecture. And matter of fact, I was having a hard time putting a word on it. Because when I would say security architecture, people would go, are you talking about offensive security architecture? And then I noticed there was no headcount. You know, in the old days, there were CTOs, chief technology officers, and they were heavily involved with the CIO. Now we don't have those anymore. So, and I noticed this lack of vision for your architecture. And then I noticed this immaturity, and I thought to him that, you know, it's funny because all your security controls and everything come from your architecture, but yet nobody really kind of understands the way all these come into play, and that's where all your security controls are. So I ran across this term, and it was called Marketecture, and I said, that's it, because Luke Hoffman was describing from the software side. And what he was doing is he was trying to divide his camp into 2 camps. And what he was saying is that software, you know, Marketecture was a portmanteau. It's 2 words concatenated together, right? That's what a portmanteau is. And what he was describing is the ability to sell software, put your best foot forward and sell the software. It was definitely marketing. And then at the same time, he split the other camp into tarchitecture. And he was talking about technical architecture. And that's the world he was coming from. And so there were 2 camps. And if you've ever built security architecture, or you've been a pen tester and you've been in this, I don't know if you've ever had this problem, but you're going like, I just want to know what the hell it does. you know? And when you're a tester, it becomes very important. So what this talk is about, I want to reconceptualize enterprise security architecture, and I want to look through the lens of an attacker. And we're going to use that, and we're going to look at the security architecture. We're going to keep our eye on that. And the entire thesis we're talking about is about whether offensive services can help us with our security architecture. Okay, so let's rock and roll. Here's our questions we're looking for. Are our security controls as effective as we think they are? Right? Simple. And then can we trust security solutions based on marketing claims alone? And then the last one, how do we ensure that our security strategies are evolving with the threat landscape? And that's a big one, because I would propose that architecture is not static. It's dynamic. It's changing all the time. And so if you're not changing with your security architecture and keeping it up to date, and you don't have anybody minding the store with this vision of what your architecture is going to be, guess what it does? It grows organically. And you have these overlapping softwares, and spending more money doesn't necessarily mean better security, right? And then you have to trudge through all the Marketecture to get down to the part, you know, what does it do and does it really work? And that's called efficacy. It's a term I use, and I talk about that a lot. So what I'm proposing here is I'm telling you that I believe that offensive security testing at scale and adopting offensive security testing and leveraging continuous automation, which is what we're looking at today's world. Wirefile called it a lift. Think of it as the next wave, but autonomous pen testing is definitely here to stay. And we're going to talk about that. And that this continuous testing is not only important, I would say it is critical. And that's the whole talk. That's what we're going to talk about. And hopefully by the end of this talk, I will have brought you over to my side of the fence, and then we'll be talking about how do we get it done. So let's look at a couple of use cases to make this interesting. This has got two stories to it, okay? I told you that I worked for Birch Klein, and I flew under that. So a lot of these cases you're going to see, these are actual pen tests. I'm the pen tester. I'm the one that done this, and this is called full scope adversary emulation. And I'm going to repeat that again, full scope adversary emulation. And I would say that it's sad that I have to put those terms together just to explain to you what pen testing should be, okay? And I'll explain that in a minute. This story has two stories. The first story is the actual event. And I was asked to do full scope adversary emulation for a school. This is a rather large school. I can talk about it because A, it's been adjudicated, and B, it was in the news, and that report you see up in the far right-hand corner where it has the news outlet is actually my report. And if you go look for the link, you'll see that, and you'll see the investigator reporter throw it across the table, and it'll spat out. And that's the second story we're going to talk about. The first story is, by the time I finished this test, I started from the outside, and this is what happened. They had a pretty good architecture, pretty good standing, but by the time I was finished, I owned the doors, the cameras, the air conditioning system, the police department, full control. And I had persistence, data exfiltration, and that's called the full life cycle of a P-test, the entire life cycle of a pen test. Okay? Now you're probably thinking red team, but wait, we're going to come back to that. Okay? So that's the first story. And the important part of the story is that happened in 2020. About 2020, sometime 3 years later, a buddy of mine named Philip Wiley comes to me and he says, hey, you're not going to believe what just happened. The news is calling me and they want me to do this interview on your test. And I was like, I knew about it because he didn't know at the same time I was talking to the FBI. And I wasn't the one talking, my colleague was, because I kind of stay in the shadows. Not because I'm trying to be mysterious, but politics gets messy. And I didn't really want to be involved in there. I was kind of half in, half out, and I was doing all the work. And so we knew that the real story, and the real story was the one I would encourage you to go look at the media, but the story was that a teenager had hacked the school and took it over, and the investigative reporter you see over there to the left was interviewing the people, and they were, that was security theater. And this is going to come a common theme about security theater. And that story sounded much better than what was really happening. What was really happening is that even though I delivered the report in that they didn't secure it properly, the student, supposedly the student, they thought it was the father maybe, wasn't sure, that he had got a hold of the report and he used it like a blueprint in order to hack them. How do we know that? Because he was spitting it out on the floor and taunting them as they were doing that. And so that was the real story going in. So what does that have to do with the topic? Well, it has a lot to do with the topic. Because for one thing, this organization, had they not asked me to do this, they'd never know the state of their entire architecture, right? Because it was full scope adversarial emulation was a test. The second part of the story, though, it's more than just knowing. It's doing something about it. So they didn't do anything, and unfortunately, this got hit again and became a part of another news story later on. So it's not hard to find. You can go look at it and take a look at it, but I thought it was germane to our conversation. So let's rock and roll to the actual topic. This is based on Bruce Snyder's talk. Bruce Snyder had a talk that he did, and he was talking about the mirage, and he was talking about that when humans are dealing with complex topics, that they need a model. And they have to have a model in order to understand risk. So if we're crossing the street, we don't really need a model for that, right? We intuitively know that crossing the street, we need to look both ways, or, damage can happen. But when we're dealing with more complex topics, models are what help us balance reality and what really is going on with our security. My proposal is to say, can offensive security be a model that helps you do that? And the answer is absolutely yes. That's what it's for. And what it helps you do is align the two. Because the problem is, when you're an organization that doesn't align the two, you run the risk of the consequences of not having that alignment. You have a false understanding of what your security is. Why? Because you're not testing. Or you're only testing very limited. This is the human side of it, okay? And I'm going to use myself for this model and this explanation, I'm going to use myself. So when automation and pen testing came around, I was a bit critical of it. And it would go like this. There's no way you're going to replace a pen tester. Now, I wasn't coming from the perspective of the model saying here that my identity was tied into it. I was coming from the perspective that the risk, the false understanding of pen testing and relying upon automation 100% without an SME involved in it, and the risk that was going to create for the industry. And that was my concern. But when we're dealing with trying to move people to new world ways of thinking, you have to be aware of this human side. And let me give you another example of how this model is useful in order to change the world views when you're trying to move people around world shifting, different paradigms, is that some people are in a habit. Here's an attacker's point of view. I attack them, I can visualize what they're doing. I know the guy's tanium is falling off the line. I know the guy in the SOC comes in and his job is to sit there in a chair and spend half his day trying to figure out why the agents aren't checking in. That's habit. And that becomes memorialized and it becomes habit. And you need to ask yourself, is that useful? Why not deal with the root issue? Why don't you make a better product? Why the hell is your agent falling off in the first place? Things like that. So and then the other one's power. And that's human nature too, right? You're going to take away my identity, my revenue's tied into it. That's power, and you have to deal with those. So sometimes we fail at our companies on shifting them and helping them deal with risk, not because it's not the right thing to do, but because of the human side. So we have to be aware of this. And it's complex. Your architecture is not what you think it is. And this is just kind of a pretty graphic to kind of show you. You got multi-tenant, you got multi-cloud, you got niche cloud, you got the cloud providers you know, and all of that, your ESA, your Enterprise Security Architect, has got to cover all that. It can't be legacy stuck on-prem because you're no longer behind the prem, right? Zero trust, right? So you have to have an ESA that covers all this. Now, CNAP is an up-and-coming. We're not going to talk about that, but we will talk about the concept. The concept is one pane of glass, right, in order to govern this complexity, or this, right? Because now we're doing deep dives. This is what we're really dealing with. So your security architecture's got to cover all of this, not just your on-prem. And the swivel chairs that you have in your organization, attackers like me love to take advantage of that. If you have 50 people in the chair and they're all swivel chairing, mining the store with all these behaviors with software and everything, attackers know you do that because they are you. I mean, you think about it. They're you. They used to be admins. They think like you. They take advantage of that. Here's another case. This company was a government company under Bart Klein. They were worried about their elections. They wanted me to come in and to attack them. It was a two-man team, and they wanted me to attack them, and they said, hey, we're really concerned that, an attacker could eventually, impact our local elections. That's your goal. We'd like you to attack us, kind of find that out. We don't want to hold you back. There's no limits, and that kind of deal. So we started in stage 1, you see there, and by stage 1 complete, we had already completed the goal, and I'll show you that. The second phase was the bonus plan, and that's where I take over. I gain persistence. I dig in so deep that you can't get me out of there even if you wanted to. And that's what attackers do. That's what real-world attackers do, or ATPs and things like that. We're emulating real threats. The last stage wasn't to tell you that I was lead, but we had accomplished the goal so fast that we gave them time back. We don't need it. And that's what the last stage is. Here's kind of a non-comprehensive view of that, but we'll just walk through the easy stuff. Think of it as chess. So the whole time you're hearing this, think of this as being a chess piece or a chessboard. So in the first stage, I'm doing a password spray, your traditional password spray. I gain access to the account right away, so I've got a pretty good working account. By that time, I'd already OSINT them. OSINT means that I'd use open source intelligence. I knew where their VPN is. I knew a lot of things. From there, I pivoted to the desktop, and because they didn't have some setups in their Azure properly, I did all my recon outside the company, sitting there. I knew who had VPNs, who didn't. All those things were worked out. Then we moved to the next stage, and what I'm doing on a full scope adversary emulation is that it's a little different than a red team exercise, is I'm trying to find as many attack paths as humanly possible. And I'm not trying to be covert, I'm being overt, and I'm trying to identify all of them as I go along, and I'm looking for misconfigurations in the architecture and things like that. So what you're seeing on the screen is a product that they use, and it's called Horizon. So what I did is I needed to gain persistence because I can't tell you how many times blue teamers misunderstand a red team exercise versus a pen test. So I always do that. I always do that anyways on my test. I try to gain persistence. Just in case you block my account, I want to continue my test, and I don't have to escalate. So I had done that. The way I did that is I went to the Horizon, what they call the Horizon server. I don't think I'm saying that. It's VM Horizonware. It's like Citrix, but it's a VM version. And the reason why I chose it is because I suspected that the admin had a blind spot, and he did. They had a published app, and I was able to get in it because I'd already owned an account, right? And then when I did a breakout and landed on the server didn't have the same protection as the published apps and the VDIs. And that became my foothold, and that's where I set up shop. I can do things in silent there, but just to be safe, I pivoted over to the VPN and made sure that I had access to that one. And then I start burying in. The top right of your site, I think it's your right? Yeah. The top right, the green, is me just doing a VPN access from Ukraine. Why is that important? Well, because I can go to Wirefall or a person in the room and say, do you do business in Ukraine? What does that have to do with elections? you know, it's reducing the threat landscape. And that goes in my report because I'm talking about security architecture and things like that. I'm talking about the entire model and the entire threat landscape. And remember, red team may not do that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So by that time, it looks like this. I want to point to the middle. See the Kerberos and the golden ticket? That's what they call golden ticket. And this isn't a comprehensive talk about hacking. If you want to go look that up, there's a lot of great people that do that. Go look it up. But what it means here is that the reason why the Kerberos ticket was able to do it is because their foundation of their Active Directory at that time was 2012. They can't possibly be rotating their Kerberos account automatically because it doesn't exist. And so that goes in the report, see, because I'm talking about a layered defense. And remember, when you talk about architecture, you got enterprise security architecture, that's the IT side, and then our scaffolding for enterprise security architecture scaffolds on top of that. And they interact with one another. So when I'm doing the offensive testing, I'm doing the efficacy and trying to show all the different misconfigurations that make it possible for the entire life cycle of an attack to occur. So more of the things. So I'm not going to go through all this. I'm just going to tell you, just know that by the time I was finished, I owned the cloud on one side. So I went in, then I went up to the cloud. I owned the Azure side of one domain. I own both domains, and I own the other cloud on the other domain, and then my goal comes in. And if you look really close on this slide, look down in the left-hand corner, you see the polling software right here. And then you see the email with the attachments. I'm reading the email of the conversations between people, and I'm doing it because it's called looting. I'm looting the environment, and I'm taking the passwords of them having a conversation with the developer of this company, right? Now, I can't legally pop this company, so this is just a demonstration that I could have. And so now the question comes, did I achieve my goal? And it's plausible. It's plausible. Somebody with this type of access, why would I take on your encryption out in the field? I'll just wait for you to bring all your data back in, and if I can just jack with the integrity, you got a problem on your hands. You need to explain to the American people how I've just jacked with the integrity of your election, and that alone is problematic. So when we're talking about security, I told you, let's talk about it, think about it as chess, okay? So the knight is unpredictable. He can get into places that you normally can't. That represents the pen test. And then I want you to look at the rook. The rook is your traditional audits. And you combine those two together, we'll talk about at the very end, I'll show you how that's called a hybrid pen test on an application layer. But you combine those techniques together, these offensive techniques, and you combine them together, and that's what you're doing is protecting the king, right? That's your prized possessions. So I want you to kind of keep that in your mind when we're talking about playing chess. Here's another use case. This one's called human-operated ransomware. And so the company was concerned about that. So what I did is I'm fast-forwarding. I'm inside the company, and the thing you're seeing up to the top left, the right is the kill chain, right? And then the left you see up there with the pretty graphics is me inside their backups. So how did I get in there? Well, it's called security architecture. When you do a single sign-on, you get choices. You make a mistake on that, and I'm in your environment, and you forget that you have local accounts going on too, you better have secured that because that's all I did. I went in and I looked at their architecture. I said, I wonder if these guys even know that they have local authentication too. Tried it, boom, I'm in. What did I do with it? I restored their backups to a drive that I wanted to, and then I looted through them and started pwning everything else too, you know? And so I own the environment, and then when I sent the ransomware notice in there to do the simulation, I used a new technique. One, because it made me chuckle. You know, I'm using Teams, and it's kind of fun, you know, it's kind of lead, you know. I send my ransomware notice through Teams. But the reason why I'm doing it mainly is not because I'm trying to pat my ego. I'm doing it because there's a vulnerability there. The company had allowed external sharing, and they had setups in their Azure that made that possible. So that's why I chose the route. It just so happened it was funny. But it also showed them a problem with their architecture, a weakness in their architecture, and a misconfiguration that was going to cost them dearly with social engineering. And I could combine all of these threat landscapes together, stitch them together in order to show this. Attackers don't normally do what you think they're going to do, okay? Attackers really, Microsoft did a pretty good job of showing you that attackers, you know, they really don't care whether you think they're impressed because they got domain admin. If I can steal your password, I don't care if you think I'm elite. I'm there to make money, you know? And it's not about domain admin. And they take the path of least resistance. And so you need to keep that in mind when you're dealing with your security architecture and dealing with architecting. Why would I take on your firewall, you know, when there's other low-lying fruit that I can attack through? Here's another case, a simple case of this. I was looking at this company, and I was doing a pen test, and the first thing that got my curiosity is I went to listen to the mind of a hacker, is I said, wow, you know, they're using... Why do they pick Freshworks? Freshworks is used for knowledge base that you would share outside, and then you would have an internal help desk. And these guys don't have a product. Why are they using it? That's what's going on in my head. And then I said, oh, well, I wonder if they have a vulnerability. I look, oh, they got subdomain takeovers. That's really interesting. Maybe I can leverage that. And then I thought, oh, you know what? I bet they don't even know that the KB could be their knowledge base, could be exposed outward. And I thought, you know what, I think I'll just create a fake account. So I created a fake account, went into their knowledge base with a fake account, started reading their knowledge base, and lo and behold, they had the Wi-Fi password written in their knowledge base. To them, they think it's only me, right?
It's helpful.
Yeah, they didn't know. So what does that happen? Well, you know the end of that story. Jump in the car, get close to the environment, game over. And that's all of these things that I've showed you so far are all preventable, every one of them. These are simple hacks that are catastrophic. So they start out simple, and then they blossom into losing the entire company. And there's a thing that Microsoft is peddling, and they're calling it friction. Papa Shell in the room can tell you what an ODA loop is. But to keep it simple, what you want to do is you want to raise the cost of somebody getting into you. And you want to create so much friction, and it be so painful for the attacker to get into you that I'm just going to go to somebody else that's easier. And think of it as friction. But in order to do that, you have to have offensive testing and know how you're being attacked, so that, because you think of it only having 3,000 soldiers against 1 million. Sounds impossible. But it's not. You just need to prioritize. And that's what offensive services allow you to do. You can't be everywhere, so you have to line your security controls up at the proper places, and you have to be very smart and strategic about their placement. And that's what this is talking about. It's talking about strategically placements of real security that actually works, and efficacy testing. So when we talk about offensive security types, this is the part where we're going to define what I've been saying over and over again. The only one I want you to really pay attention to is 2 of them. Right here, Philip Wiley does a really good job of explaining to you what a pen test is. I'm not going to read it to you. Everybody knows what a pen test is. You should have a good understanding, but if you don't, make sure you do. But I am going to talk to you about the second one because I've said it several times. So full scope adversary emulation for me is a comprehensive security testing approach that goes beyond compliance-based pen testing, period. That's what I'm saying. And I'm not talking to you about red teaming. Let me explain this. The guy sitting right in this chair, his name is Wirefall. He has a definition of pen testing. Love it. It's beautifully simple. Red teaming is the ability that you are testing the ability of the defender to respond to your test. You're not necessarily trying to find every attack path. And then Joe Vest expands that definition of red team if you want a better explanation or a more lengthy one. Joe Vest does a really good job of explaining that. But the point is, who gives a darn whether I'm doing red teaming or whatever name it is? The point of it is the benefit from doing those points of test, okay? So now you know my definition in this context. You understand purple teaming. So let's look at what it would look like. So if you're doing this type of test where you're doing vulnerability assessment, scanning, things like that, I would argue that you're kind of really only doing the minimum preparedness. You're not really doing a life cycle that looks something like this. If you're doing what I'm talking about, modern offensive testing, where you're proactive and continuously and holistically testing your environment, you're actually doing an advanced security posture, and you have a threat-informed testing. It's not based on what you think it's doing, it's based on actual fact-driven models that help you align the difference between what you perceive your security to be versus what it is. Here's another example. This one's kind of a fun one. This organization did all the police department, they ran all of the helicopter in the air, did all the helicopter testing. I mean, they provided that service for many people around the United States, police departments, things like that. So the copters in the air, and other people can see where the guy they're trying to arrest on their phones, you know, that kind of deal. And it was in the air, and I was asked to test it. So what I did is, the first thing you see here is I didn't know anything about helicopters and things. It sounded really cool, and I was really excited about doing the test, but I knew absolutely nothing. So for me, it starts with OSINT and recon. So it goes like this. Oh, well, you know, these are taxpaying money you're spending here. So I went out and looked. If you're spending taxpayer money, you're required to tell the public what you're spending the money on. And I said, I bet these people have told them everything. So I start searching through municipalities with these keywords and everything. And what you see down at the right, the map is me teaching myself the topology. So I steal that, I loot the topology. Now I have a really good understanding. What you see up at the top right, where it says internal server era, is when I was I had OSINTed this person that was a developer, and I thought maybe they had something to do with it, but I wasn't sure. And they threw an error message with an email address. And that gave me a clue of the email, which led me back to the GitHub, and I read through all that, and I noticed some key words this person was using. And their lexicon, their language was very specific. And I went, it's interesting. And then I thought, well, I'll probably use that for a brute force if I need it. And then over to the left, you're seeing a mobile phone that was branded, that was white labeled, and a person was bragging about the UI and all the work they had done in college, you know, for this company. And I tied it back in. I go, oh, you know what? That's the software they're using, right? Up at the top left, you're seeing the PHP. That's pretty traditional, you know, recon and understanding what, you know, software they're using. So the next thing is you see me popping. I'm going to speed up. You see me popping the inside deal. There's a vulnerability in software. I get in there. I brute force the interface with the lady's credential, the password that gets me in the middleware of the software. By the time I'm finished, I'm here. Let me show you here. I'm here. I'm sitting back. I'm watching popcorn, watching people get arrested around the United States. Pretty cool job. Here's the PTES part, and the two I got circled. Think about it. If I'm wrong, and persistence and everything has nothing to do with pen testing, then why the hell is it on the post-exploit and persistence and everything? And I think I know the answer to it, and it's mainly because, you know, compliance has kind of dumbed down our pen testers where they're not really what they used to be. And I'm saying that they're absolutely critical when you're talking about your security architecture as a whole. One more use case, and I'm going to gloss over this real fast, but this is more of a purple team exercises, them loading up what's called credential guard. And the only thing that's important here is humans. Let me explain that. I said, are you ready to test? We're ready. Are you sure you're ready to test? You're ready. A third time, right? what you see up to the left is they had it configured, but it wasn't running. So the test has already started then. That becomes part of the story. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. You absolutely have to do efficacy testing. And this collaboration between offense and defense is not an option for you. You have to, if you don't want to be the victim. So real quickly, here we go. This is the end of that story, and I'm going to go through. This is the slide I was talking about, and I'm going to do it really quickly. All this is if you're doing OWASP top 10, you're doing the bare minimum. And what I would say is that you need to be doing application verification standard for your most critical apps, and that's when the hybrid, that's when you take the Knight and you take the Rook, you put them together. It's called a hybrid pen test. You don't hear people talk about it. But what you're doing is you're auditing, and it goes like this. Show me your security requirements for the app. Show me this, and that's more audit. And you're doing the pen test. And that allows you to measure back the other way to see if you actually are shifting left. This is why it's important, okay, to do this. And I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to go past this if y'all are okay with it, and we can talk after. Last story, a fun one. Okay, so I was in a test, I was watching, and I had control over the KVM. I'm watching the guy do his work, and I know exactly what's going to happen. He's going to get a box that's halfway installed, and he's going to go home. And I waited for it. Sure enough, that's what happened. I corrupted the tree. I poisoned the tree. He deployed it into his fleet. But at the same time, I used his box, and I ran InVay, and I sprayed the area in order to collect more credentials. And this stuff goes on. So you have to know that the enemy is among you at many times. Here's a solution, and we're done. I have to give a solution. So think of it as shape, and I'm going to leave you with this last thought. If you're not testing your defenses, don't worry about it, because attackers are going to test it for you. So I would say if you don't want to be the consequences of that and suffer from that, then you need to be actively testing your talk. And I'll take questions from here out the door. So I appreciate it. Any other questions? We're done. I'm sorry to speed through that.
Could you have the last slide on there while answering questions?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Okay. I think you said last slide, this one? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Will you be posting these slides anywhere?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, there's nothing confidential. I can talk about the tests. They're all redacted. These are tests I've done. I've done a lot of pen tests under Birch Klein, and like I said, I just don't talk about it a lot. But these you can. What other? Come on, y'all got questions?
Do you have any recommended tooling for doing this, at scale, instead of like, if you don't have the people to do it?
Yeah, I do. His question is, it's a great one. He says, do I have any recommended tooling tools? I try not to talk about software because I'm trying to be vendor neutral. But I have preferences. I've wrote actually papers, competitive analysis for companies. Software, I don't talk about a lot, but I wrote one with red teaming. It got bought by IBM. I wouldn't use them, just being real direct. Sorry to be so blatantly obvious, but I just wouldn't do it. I would encourage you to get a hold of the test, and I can tell you this guy that just asked the question does that. I'd get a hold of the test and see where it ends and where it starts. And there's some good software out there that does it. I use them. One I will give you is Trickius. Trickius is a pretty good tool, especially if you're doing large-scale pen testing. You can automate a lot of things. Another one is Phil Wylip works at a company. That's another tool that's real. It's not bullshit that I actually work. And he's right. You have to do this at scale, or you have to hire people like me that know how to attack that way. It's a different way of attacking. It's more living off the land techniques. It does cater more to red teaming, which I'll hear red teaming as being. It's just a different way of attacking. I'll start hacking right from a Windows box, because in reality, that's really what happens, in the real world. People, get it home, they don't roll up with their Kali box, and, they use them, but that's kind of the way it goes on. What else? Any other question?
Someone who's just getting started, maybe knows a little bit of networking, Linux, what do you recommend they do to get into pen testing? They learn virtually, mandatory.
Yeah, that one let's take outside. It's a great question, and I definitely want to answer it. But it's not the same prescription for every person. It's different. I would say, if I had to give you a short one right here, I'd say take your own inventory, know what your strengths and your weaknesses are, and then kind of use those to kind of go in there. That's what I did. And actually, my buddy recognized it in me before I did. And he said, dude, you'd be really good as a pen tester. And I went, dude, I'm weak. I can't be a pen tester. And he was like, no, you'll be really good. You just don't know it yet. And so I would do that. I would look at your inventory of like what you have, what your strengths are, and then kind of trying to align it. And then there's tons of resources out there if you want to be a pen tester. It's not the easiest job, and it doesn't pay the most nowadays. So there's a lot of options. I'm not trying to discourage you from it, but there's a lot of options out there. Any other questions? We got 2 minutes.
Darren, artificial intelligence is the buzzword of the last couple of years. Have you seen artificial intelligence being an effective way to extend what a human pen tester can do, or to make the tools scale?
Yeah, that's the part where I told you I was cognitively biased emotionally, because my fear wasn't worried about it taking my job, because I would argue that where the hell do you think automated pen testing came from? It came from pen testers. Pen testers have been automating things for a long time. You know, that's how it evolved, because they can't do it all. So they've automated things. And AI, the answer to your question is, yeah, there's definitely validity in tools to an automated, especially a lot of the hacks that you see here. I would call those low-lying fruits. But they won't fix broken business logic. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say that you're an accounting firm, right? And you're posting to your general ledgers, and you have a configuration problem. You allow all your clerks to post to the general ledger. And when they post to the general ledger, they post through the general ledger. And what that means in accounting terms is that you can't just delete that. You make a mistake, you got to do a journal entry. So let's just say you're a publicly traded company, and I just want to jack with you. And I start posting all kinds of crap to your general ledger, and you're on your borrowing base. You have borrowed money, and just the mere fact that I've been messed with the integrity of your books is going to cause you a huge amount of problems. And automation won't catch that. You know, one time I had data export trade, I used Grammarly to do data exfiltration. I did that because it's a way of bending people's mind, and that's what attackers do. They don't attack you where you think they would do. If it was that easy, we would have solved it a long time ago. But automation does help you do things at scale. It will do a lot for, the AI will do a lot for automation like this. I use it myself. I'm a little weak in coding. But that's my time, guys. So if we want to talk, let's talk out in the hallway. And I really appreciate you coming to my talk.